You can't expect me to block my ex. We're still friends." Those were the words my wife said to me, and those were the words that ended my marriage. Not loudly, not violently, but with the quiet, permanent finality of a door clicking shut in an empty house. I have replayed them more times than I can count, not because they confused me, because they didn't. They were the clearest thing Billy ever said to me, and she had no idea she was saying goodbye. "My name is Shedrack Winston. I am an architect. I design structures for a living. I understand load-bearing walls. I understand foundations. I understand the exact point at which a crack stops being a crack and becomes a collapse. I have spent my entire adult life building things meant to last. So when I tell you that I walked out of my marriage with one bag and never went back, I need you to understand what it cost me. It was not dramatic. It was not impulsive. It was the most deliberate act of my life, and it started, the way most irreversible things do, with something so small I almost missed it. I had borrowed her coat on a cold evening. My own was at the dry cleaner. I reached into the pocket for my car keys she'd borrowed earlier that week. What I found instead was a receipt. Meridian Bistro, table for two. Starter, main, dessert, 2 glasses of wine. 1:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I stood in the hallway of our home, and I held that small piece of paper, and I felt the specific chill of a man who has just found the first crack in a wall he believed was solid. Tuesday was her study group afternoon, something she had mentioned 3 weeks in a row with no detail, no invitation, none of the easy transparency that had always been the signature of our marriage. I put the receipt back. I put the coat back on the hook. I went into the cold without it, sat in my car, and stared at our front door. And right then, a memory came to me that I had not visited in years. My father, kneeling on our kitchen floor when I was 9 years old, begging my mother not to leave. She didn't even look down at him. She stepped over his hand on her shoe and walked straight into the car of the man she'd been texting for 6 months. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched every second of it. I watched my father shrink from dignity into desperation over 3 years of calls and unlocked doors and false hope. I made a promise to that 9-year-old boy on those stairs. I would never beg. Not once. Not for anyone. I drove away from our house that night without saying a word to Billy. I had not yet decided to leave. I had decided something far more patient. I was going to wait. I was going to give her every opportunity to tell me herself. She never did. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. For 6 weeks, I watched my wife the way I study a building before I recommend demolition. Quietly, without alerting anyone, gathering information with the kind of patience that only makes sense if you understand what's at stake. I did not snoop through her phone. I did not hire anyone. I simply paid attention, which is something I had always done and something she had perhaps, over time, forgotten. Her phone went face down every time I walked into a room. Not always, just often enough to become a pattern. She laughed once at something on her screen with a laugh I didn't recognize, softer and more private than the laugh she used with me, and when I looked over, she tilted the screen slightly away without seeming to realize she'd done it. She mentioned the name Damien twice in passing conversation, both times quickly, lightly, with the specific careful casualness of someone testing whether a name will land. I let it land without reaction. I was a still lake. I showed her nothing. Damien. I knew who he was. She had told me about him early in our relationship, the way people disclose old wounds to new loves. Briefly, with the implication that the chapter was finished. 4 years together in undergrad. He had cheated. She had ended it. Done. Closed. I had believed her because she had given me no reason not to, and because the woman I married was not someone who left doors open behind her, or so I had thought. The Sunday it finally broke open started like every other Sunday. Brunch, television, the warm, comfortable rhythm of two people who know how to exist near each other. At 3 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it too quickly, caught herself, slowed the motion. She read the screen, set it down. I kept my eyes on the television. 30 seconds later, she picked it up again and typed a reply. I asked, without turning my head, who she was texting. "Just Damien," she said. "He's asking about a restaurant recommendation." The word just landed between us like a stone in still water. I turned and looked at her then, And I asked the question I had been building toward for 6 weeks. Not are you cheating? Not what is going on, but something more precise. Does he respect that you're married? She told me he wasn't inappropriate. She told me they were just friends. She answered the wrong question with complete confidence, and the confidence itself was the answer I had actually been looking for, because a woman who has genuinely closed a chapter does not defend the character of the man in it. She simply says, that chapter is closed. That night I lay in the dark beside her, and I made the decision to have one honest conversation. Not an ultimatum, not a threat. One clear, direct conversation, and whatever she said, I would believe her. I reached for her hand under the blanket. She took it. I held it for 10 seconds, counting deliberately, the way you hold something you already know you are about to let go. Then I released it gently and rolled away. She lay there in the dark. I could feel her awake beside me, that particular quality of stillness that is the opposite of sleep. Something had shifted between us, and she could feel it even if she couldn't name it. I had spent 6 weeks being a still lake, and still water, when you know how to read it, is never actually still. I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the house. I had been building her a house, not a client's house, our house. I had purchased land on the quiet outskirts of the city 2 years earlier, drawn the plans myself, obsessively, lovingly, the way a man designs something when the person it is for is the same person he thinks about when he wakes up at 5 in the morning. The kitchen faced east for morning light because Billy always ate breakfast facing the window. The study had double soundproofing because she needed silence to think. And there was a small room I had designed with specific humidity controls and a glass ceiling because she had said once, only once, soft and sleepy on a balcony at 10 p.m. I want a place where I can breathe without my pager going off. She had said it once. I had heard it. I had built it. Lying there in the dark that Sunday night, I thought about that garden room, and I thought about what it would mean if the conversation I was about to have went the wrong way. I thought about it for a long time. 3 days later, Tuesday evening, Shedrack made dinner the way he always did on her closing nights. Billy came home, changed, sat down. It looked like a marriage. It was already a funeral. I folded my hands and told her, quietly, without accusation, what I had noticed, not the receipt, not the screenshot, the pattern, the phone, the careful way she said his name, the text at 11:47 p.m. she had left the room to read. I told her what the pattern had made me feel, and I was precise about it. There is a door in our marriage you haven't let me see behind, and it has his name on it. She told me nothing was happening. She told me they were friends. She told me I was being unfair. Then I asked her to block him. Not forever, not from jealousy, because this specific connection to this specific person was costing our marriage something real, and I was asking her, clearly, directly, to choose. She shook her head. You can't expect me to block my ex. We're still friends. I pushed back my chair. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom and pulled the bag I had quietly packed 2 days earlier from the back of the closet. She followed, insisting we weren't done. I stopped and looked at her, not with anger, not with hurt, but with something she had never seen on my face before and immediately recognized as the most terrifying thing about me. Finality. I love you, I said. I will not beg you to choose me. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut quietly. That quiet was the loudest sound either of us had ever heard. She called me 12 times over 4 days. I watched every call come in. I let everyone ring to voicemail, not because I was punishing her, because answering would have made it easier for her, and I was done making things easy at the cost of making things honest. Her voicemails told me everything. Day 1, she was controlled, certain this was a fight we'd recover from. Day 2, the edges softened. Day 3, she stopped calling and sent 3 words by text. Are you okay? 3 words she had never had to send me before. Day 4, I miss you. Then at 11 p.m., Shedrack, please. I listened to every message alone in the apartment of a colleague who lent me a room without asking questions. I ate, I worked, I sat with my grief the way a man sits with something he has decided not to run from, privately, without performance, with absolute internal devastation. I was not okay. I simply refused to confuse suffering with weakness. On day 5, she called Damien. He told her I would come around. When she asked what if I didn't, he said, then he wasn't the right fit. She hung up feeling colder than before she called. She sat on our couch in our home that still smelled like my presence and understood something quietly and terribly. The man she thought she could always run to had just described her husband leaving as a matter of fit. I would never have used that word. Not in 1,000 years. 5 weeks after I left, Billy had the worst night of her medical career. Multi-vehicle accident. 3 critical patients. 6 hours in surgery. She walked out of the OR at 2 in the morning with shaking hands and leaned against the hallway wall and reached for her phone, pure muscle memory, and almost dialed my number. Because that was what she had always done. Every brutal shift, every patient she nearly lost, every moment when the weight of the coat felt like it might collapse her, I had been the voice on the other end. Not with advice, just, talk to me, I'm here, tell me everything. She didn't call me, she called her mother. Her mother listened, asked good questions, said the right things, then said, Billy, that man stood in the rain outside your medical school exam for 2 hours because he didn't want to miss walking out with you. What did Damien do the night of your board exams? Billy went silent. Damien had texted, "You've got this," at 9 a.m. and not texted again until the following morning. Mom, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to make you see clearly. She hung up and sat in the hallway in her blood-flecked coat. For the first time since I left, she was not defending her decision. She was examining it. A junior resident found her and asked if she was okay. She nodded, then said, almost to herself, "Go home to whoever is waiting for you." She went home to an empty house and did not reach for anyone. It was her colleague, Dr. Amara, who told her about the house by accident over lunch, mentioning a half-built property on Okafor Road with an unusual brief. Glass breakfast nook facing east, double-paned study, a small outbuilding with a specialized foundation designed apparently for exact humidity controls. A garden room. Billy set her fork down. She had said it once. One time, soft and sleepy on a balcony at 10 p.m. I want a place where I can breathe without my pager going off. Once. And I had heard it. And I had built it into the bones of a house she didn't even know existed. She drove there after her shift and stood at the fence line in her white coat, the concrete skeleton, the eastern-facing breakfast nook already taking shape, the small outbuilding where the garden room would eventually rise, construction equipment sitting idle, no workers, no movement, something loved and then abandoned. She stood there for a long time. She understood then what she couldn't understand the night I left. I was not asking her to block Damien out of jealousy. I was asking her to close a door so I could build her something permanent, and she had chosen the open door. She got back in her car. She made it 2 miles before she pulled over and cried until she couldn't see the dashboard. When she finally stopped, she opened her phone and typed 6 words to my number. "I saw what you were building." The ticks went blue. I had read it. I did not reply. She went home to her mother for a weekend. She needed to be somewhere that remembered her before all of it. Before the coat, before Damien, before me, before the woman she had become inside the choices she had made. Her mother fed her jollof rice and asked no questions for 2 hours, then asked one. "Did Shedrack ever embarrass you?" "No." "Did he ever raise his hand to you?" "Never." "Did he ever make you feel like a burden?" Silence. "No," Billy said finally. "He never did any of those things." Her mother refilled her glass. Then, "You chose poorly, my daughter." Not harshly, with the gentle, devastating gravity of a woman who had watched her daughter make brilliant decisions for 29 years and one catastrophic one. I am not saying Damien is a bad person. I am saying he was a door you should have closed years ago. You kept it open, in your husband's house, and you were surprised when he could not live there anymore. I didn't cheat on him, Mama. No, you did something harder to forgive than cheating. You made him feel like he was competing for a place he should have been certain of. Billy did not argue. For the first time in her life, she did not argue with her mother. That night, sleeping in her childhood bed, Damien sent a voice note. She listened to it twice, then put it face down and did not listen again. Something had shifted. The audience leaned forward, because for the first time she was choosing silence over Damien. And that silence was the beginning of everything. She almost didn't go to the colleague's birthday gathering. Her therapist, who she'd started seeing 6 weeks after I left, told her isolation was its own trap. So she went. She was fine at first. Then Damien walked in. He didn't see her immediately. He was laughing with a woman beside him, tall, effortlessly at ease, her hand on his arm with the specific comfort of someone who has claimed a person. Then someone nearby called out congratulations, and Damien smiled and said, "Thank you. Yeah, we're engaged." He said it looking at the woman beside him. Warmly, genuinely. Billy watched his face when he said it. She had spent years telling herself she knew his face, and she saw it now, clearly, for the first time. He was in love. With someone else. He had been in love with someone else while texting Billy, while keeping her in orbit, while calling himself her friend. He turned and saw her. His expression did something complicated for a fraction of a second, then normalized into the easy warmth he always wore. "Congratulations," Billy said. Genuinely. She put down her wine glass, said goodbye to the host, and walked into the night air. She was not heartbroken. She was awake. She had spent years giving a corner of herself to a man who was fully living his life, while keeping her just tethered enough that she always had one foot in his past. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers found an envelope, a letter she had written weeks ago and never sent. She turned it over in her hands. Put it back. Not yet. She drove to my apartment building on a Tuesday evening with the divorce papers on the passenger seat. She told herself she was going to sign them, return them, give me my clean exit. The right thing. She parked outside. She sat with the papers. 40 minutes passed. She watched people come and go from the building. A man walking a dog. 2 children chasing each other across the courtyard. The ordinary procession of lives being lived by people who were not her. What she could not know was that I was standing at the 3rd-floor window. I had recognized her car the moment it stopped. I stood there with my hands loose at my sides, watching the internal war I could read even from up here in the angle of her shoulders, the absolute stillness of someone fighting themselves. I did not go down. She did not come up. After 40 minutes, she started the engine and drove away. I stayed at the window until her taillights disappeared. Then I went back to the table where my work was spread out. The house plans were still rolled in the corner, tied with the same cord, untouched for 9 months. I sat down. I picked up my pencil. I worked. I was not over her. I was choosing myself. Those 2 things are different from each other in ways that matter enormously, and I understood the difference in my bones because I had watched my father confuse them on a kitchen floor when I was 9 years old and never recover. 8 months after I left, Billy was in the ER when a 41-year-old man was brought in following a cardiac event. She worked. He survived. She went to tell his wife, and the woman in the hallway collapsed into tears and said, "He kept telling me something was wrong for weeks. I kept saying he was fine. I kept saying he was overreacting. I wasn't listening." Billy stood in her white coat and felt those words land somewhere so specific and so personal that she had to excuse herself. She sat in the supply room for 7 minutes. She went through the inventory of moments she had dismissed. The night I came to bed and didn't reach for her hand, she had thought, "He's tired." The Sunday I asked who she was texting, she had thought, "He's being territorial." The kitchen table, when I told her clearly and without cruelty what was being lost, she had filtered it through the assumption that she understood the situation better than I did. She had spent years training her instincts in service of her patients. She had applied none of it to her own husband. She had diagnosed 1,000 people and never once stopped to diagnose what was happening inside her own home. She drove home and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes. Then she went inside, sat at the kitchen table, picked up a pen, and began writing a letter. Not a text, not a voice note. A letter. The camera would have shown her hand moving across the paper for a long time. When she finished, she folded it, sealed the envelope, wrote my name on the front, and put it in her coat pocket. She left it there. For now. 9 months after I left, we ended up at the same professional dinner, a development firm's annual event, neither of us expecting the other. I saw her before she saw me, which gave me a moment to steady myself before the room required anything of me. She saw me from across the hall. I was speaking with someone from the hosting firm, and beside me was a woman from my professional circle, not claiming me, just present in the easy way of someone comfortable being near a person. She laughed at something I said. A real laugh, not the social kind. Billy stood with her champagne glass and recognized that laugh. She had owned it once. She had been the person in the room who got my quiet, dry humor and felt the private thrill of being the one who understood me. At the end of the evening, she was collecting her coat when I appeared 2 feet behind her. "How are you, Billy?" She turned. "I'm better. Slowly." "Good." A silence that contained 9 months of everything. "Shedrack." "Take care of yourself," I said, gently, finally. I walked out. She stood with her coat half on and her hand inside the pocket, fingers closing around the envelope she had been carrying for weeks. She took it out, turned it over, then put it back. Not yet. But soon. She knew it now with the certainty of someone who has finally made a decision. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I held it before opening it, made coffee, sat down, then read it. She did not ask me to come back. She did not bargain. She named the specific moments: the supply room, the house on Okafor Road, her mother's table, Damien's engagement. She named what she had called friendship and what it had actually been. She told me she knew my father's story, knew what walking away cost me, knew exactly who I was, and had still called my boundary dramatic. "That," she wrote, "is the thing I have to live with." She ended it with, "I hope you finish the house. I hope whoever lives in it fills the garden room with things that grow." She signed it simply, Billy. I read it once, folded it, did not reply. For 6 weeks there was silence. Then my phone rang. The foreman. "Mr. Winston, are we resuming or closing the file?" I stood at the window, the same window where I had watched her car sit outside for 40 minutes. I was quiet for a long time. "Resume," I said. "Same specifications." I hung up, I went to the corner, I unrolled the plans, I looked at the garden room, I picked up my pencil, I did not call her. But across the city, Billy's phone buzzed with a photo, an aerial shot of a construction site, workers in motion, a half-built structure coming back to life. She stared at it for a long time. Then she pinned it to the corkboard in her office, between her medical license and her graduation photo. She didn't know what it meant. Neither did I. Not exactly. But something that had stopped was moving again. And sometimes that is the only answer that matters. Not a yes, not a return, not a guarantee. Just the decision to pick up the pencil. Just the choice to build.